I need some traction. You need some traction.
So one of the big questions we have is, everyone in this room has had a certain amount of success. And the question becomes, how do you keep it up? So in 1989, Vanilla Ice, you guys might remember Mr. Ice, released his debut album, which is pretty amazing, with an incredibly catchy song called Ice Ice Baby. I won't comment on the quality of that song, but it was incredibly catchy, and it went immediately to #1 all around the world, although interestingly, not in Canada. Cue to taste in Canada. But immediately, they're #1, and you can imagine if you're with Mr. Ice and his posse in 1989 and 1990, you're thinking, we're gonna be drinking champagne and flying on private jets for the next 20 years, but it didn't exactly turn out that way. By contrast, just a few years later, Jay-Z came onto the scene. He had a different, much more sort of downtone initial beginning, but went on to produce 21 Grammy Awards and one of the most stunning commercial successes in the music business in the last 30 years. Our challenge is that in our business, there is this inconvenient truth, which is that 95% of software products fail commercially. 95%. That means that if we just leave destiny to itself, failure is our future. But it doesn't have to be that way, because there are all these clues from successful companies who have done multiple things well over long periods of time that can help light the way for the rest of us. So let's talk about a few of those. One of my favorites is the Amazon Kindle. Anybody here a Kindle user? Love that, nice. This was a massive undertaking. So the team had to bring together a large group of people, thousands of people, build new hardware, build new software. They had to invent new digital ink. They had to build a networking stack, had to digitize millions of pages of books. And in order to do that, they had this one magical little phrase that brought all those people together. Now, they could have chosen a whole bunch of interesting buzzwords to describe what they wanted to do, things like disrupting the literature world or something. But instead, the phrase was amazingly simple. It was to deliver in 60 seconds or less every book ever published in every language, in print or out, to the customer. That's a pretty ambitious goal. And what it meant, it was interesting, interviewing some of the people who had worked on this team, which included some of the folks who were in India digitizing books, is that all of those individual teams who were working mainly independently of each other, they knew exactly what they were trying to do, because they had this notion of what it was going to deliver to the customers. And as we think about all the projects that we engage in and how we describe them, do we have that simple thing that describes what we're gonna do for a customer? Not necessarily the thing we're gonna build, not the deal we're gonna get, but what it's going to do for a customer. If we go back to some words from the man himself, one of our other challenges is, how do we encode the brilliance and the magic that you had that made you successful in the first place? Because as you get successful, there are gonna be more things tugging on your time. You have conferences to attend, people to talk to, investors to talk to, and so you've got to figure out a way to encode those moments. This is not a rap star. This is one of our co-founders, Tim Jenkins. Maybe his rap name would be Timmy J. He's really big at his daughter's preschool in Southern California. But when he was starting the company, along with our two other co-founders, one of the things was that our support number rang his mobile phone. And what it meant was that anytime someone had a problem, he got to hear about it. But importantly, it was their problems he got to hear about. And so one of the interesting dynamics is, as we, again, have more and more things tugging at our time, a lot of us spend time talking to customers. But one of the realizations he had was that I spend a lot of time pitching what I'm doing to people. And he was talking about the fact that he had lost that ability over time to listen to people's problems. And he realized that was what made us successful in the beginning. We were able to iterate our product very, very quickly because we knew exactly the problems people faced. And so something that several people had used was they actually went into their calendar, and every time they had a meeting in which they were listening to someone's problems, they marked it in bright yellow. And then at the end of the month, they went back and tracked whether or not, or basically how much time they had actually spent focused on people's problems. And it's a wonderfully simple exercise, but also it's pretty amazing when you actually look at the data, how tough it is to spend that time with customers doing the thing that helped you to be so successful in the beginning. So we've been talking at the show a lot about data and all the amazing data sources. And so all of us instrument our products. We have lots of wonderful data, powerful data. But there's one missing element in so much of the data we capture, and that is how people feel. Because people buy with dollars, they purchase with dollars, but they buy with their hearts. Buying is an emotional experience. And so when you have this dynamic where you have lots and lots of data, which of them tell you how your customers feel? Because whether it's that first purchase or sticking with you, that's the thing that is actually going to be the determinant of whether or not they stay with you over the long term. Now, we use Net Promoter Score. There are lots of other technologies to do this, but as you're thinking about the mix of all the data you need to take in, how can you get your team to track how your customers actually feel about you? So then, once we know what people are doing and they know how they feel, we encode all of those brilliant insights into a spec, a product spec, a PRD, some set of words that are pretty much useless the second they're written down. Because, as it turns out, people don't really think about the world in terms of these specs. A number of years ago, I became I really didn't believe that people read these specs. So what a couple of us did is we took one of our, we're product managers, took our spec, and in the middle of this document that we had absolutely slaved over, we put a little Easter egg. It said, if you read this sentence, email me and I will give you $100. We had a little stack of $100 Amazon gift cards. And he and I were so worried. We were like, oh, what's going to happen? All people are going to find out, and then we're not going to have enough, and we don't have $2,000 to spend on this. But as it turned out, guess how many of those gift cards we gave out? 0. None. Now, to be clear, this was a team of 200 engineers, roughly a quarter of whom were, in theory, reading this spec that we had worked on days and nights and weekends, et cetera. And the reason they didn't get their $100 was that people don't remember stats and data, they remember stories. So the work that's been done at IDEO for the last 20 years, and the work that the Stanford D School has been doing in the last 10 years, has revealed all of this amazing work around how people remember things. And one of the things that's true is that human beings are story animals. We've been telling stories for millennia. In fact, if you look at memory competitions, a random stream of hundreds of single digits, the way people remember those numbers is not to remember the numbers, it's to create a story around them. And so the question becomes, as you're going and bringing other people into your venture, getting other people on board with your ideas, what are the stories that are going to capture their imagination and that are going to carry them forward with you? And what we know from the research is the more vivid, the better. This feels inconsistent with both the way we have worked historically, and it feels like it doesn't feel like engineering, but we know it's what works. Jim Collins is a great author. You guys know him from Good to Great and a number of other books. When he was looking at companies who were able to be successful over a period of time, there were a few critical traits that they demonstrated. And one of those is this mix of creativity and discipline. And the fact that you really have to have both of those factors. One of my favorite examples of this is the team at Pixar. So anybody else love Pixar here? oh God, their movies are just absolutely phenomenal. So one of the most creative teams of the past 20 years with original stories. This is one of their amazing things. Their stories are mostly original stories, not derivative like you see in many other places. And so the first 2 or 3 films came out, and it was the same core of people who had done all of the work. Well, they aspired to bring more people on and realized that, and the team, frankly, had been driving very, very hard, and they were pretty burned out. So the challenge they faced was, as we bring on new directors, who in that medium are basically the writers of the story, as we bring them on, how do we replicate the magic we had with that small group of people? How do we create a way to do it more than once? And so they created this notion, they call it the brain trust, and it's specific to the way they give feedback and both give the director enough room for her to create the idea and explore it, but the discipline to figure out whether or not that story is likely to work. Because there are a bunch of conventions around creating these films that need to be applied. And the insight that came from that wasn't just the creation of the brain trust, but it was talking all the time about the brain trust. It was the fact that they gave it a name, they made it a thing, and so when new directors and new team members came into the company, they were able to jump into the process, and they were able to ensure that it could be replicated in multiple times. Today, they've been able to release award-winning films with more than 5 directors, which is not the case typically for a studio. So think about how to encode the things that you guys do magically, give it a name, give it a language, in order to help other people as they come on board, get on board. The flip side of this is discipline. When you think about artists who have been commercially successful consistently over a long period of time, one of the things you find is this amazingly consistent discipline. So Jerry Seinfeld is known not just for his success in his comedy, but for the amount of time and attention he puts into jokes. So it's not uncommon for Jerry Seinfeld to have a single joke that he has worked on for a year and a half. We're talking about 20 seconds of words. And he'll write it, rewrite it, he'll try it in a small theater. But what it means is that in spite of all of his fame and all the things pulling at him, he still spends most of his time alone in his office writing jokes. And so the question becomes, how do we continue to keep that discipline, that thing that made us successful in the beginning, across time? The same is true for Stephen King. He's known for his quote, which is, if you don't spend 4 to 6 hours a day reading and writing, you cannot expect to be a consistently successful author. It's a lot of reading and writing. Dolly Parton was the same way. I love Dolly Parton, she's hilarious. In a 20-year period, she produced 21 albums. If you want to have that kind of success, it means, like her, you've got to write every single day. So what is it about your craft, about your profession, that you have to carve out time, move everything out of the rest of your schedule to ensure you have chunks of time, whether that's writing code, whether that's reading, whatever your thing is, make sure you have enough time to continue to be a master of your craft, and as our roles change over time, evolve the notion of what mastery is. The final example here is one of my favorites. So in the late 90s, just after Steve Jobs came back to Apple, they faced a fork in the road. They were trying to figure out what product to build next. So now remember, this is the late 90s. It's the beginning of the, or sort of just before the peak of the hype of the first internet bubble. And one of the ideas that was bouncing around was this notion of a network computer. And this is, it was talked about, and many of you might remember it. It was talked about in the same way that we talk about autonomous vehicles and bots and, a lot of the popular topics today. And so the folks at Apple were thinking about building a network computer. And fortunately for them, their CFO, Fred Anderson, came in and said, why are we building something that is likely to be a business product? We're a consumer company. And what he was getting at is this notion of product channel fit. When we first start out, we all focus appropriately on product market fit. But for our second or third acts, the question becomes, do we also have product channel fit? That is, the thing that we've made, are our people, however we sell and promote our things today, are they well suited to win again with this next one? So instead of building the network computer, they built the next Mac. So, and one of the great things about the next Mac is, number one, took advantage of all their existing channels, and they were able to pour all that creative energy into it. And this really created that turning point for Apple and the whole stream of interesting successes that came after it. Product channel fit, I would argue, is one of the most overlooked topics today in ongoing success. So success leaves clues. We know a few things. We know that if you start from the customer and work backwards, this is one of the things that it's going to keep you focused and keep everyone around you, importantly, grounded as you go forward. We know that in order to scale listening, we need to continue to find ways to do it broadly, but to make sure we understand how we're making our customers feel, not just what they're doing. We need to capture insights with stories, not specs. We need to build a system that drives creativity and discipline, create the language and the habits and rituals around that. And then we need to think about product channel fit as the close and important cousin to product market fit. So hopefully, if we're able to apply these lessons and all the other amazing things everyone here is doing, we will be able to have careers and teams that look much more like the trajectory of Jay-Z than that of Vanilla Ice. All right, take care.
I need some traction. You need some traction.